Hello, everybody. This is Everybody Settle Down. I am Charlie Marlow. That is the great Eric Messersmith. I shouldn't do this, Eric, but we're probably going to see it eventually. Just show people the mug. Show people the mug
Oh,
right out of the gate. And you said you did not buy it for yourself, though. There
I
you go.
did
The
not. The
man,
man, the
the
if you're
myth,
listening on podcast,
the legend.
that's right. I did not buy it from myself, and I did not even think about it being on the show. I typically have the plastic water bottles were out, so I'm drinking, like, regular tap water here, and I just happened to grab this cup. But, yeah, I'll go with it. The man, the myth, the legend.
Love it. Okay, so last week we did release the episode about what it's like to live in LA. But I'm on vacation last week, and I have to say that the timing could not have been worse because right as I'm on vacation, the Trump trial, the conviction, everybody going crazy about that. So we'll talk about that at the end of the show because at this point now it's a week old. So Eric, why don't we start with speaking of old, why don't we start with hey, Biden is old and a lot of people are writing articles in magazines and newspapers about Joe Biden being old.
Yeah, well, a couple of things on this. So the Wall Street Journal put out a piece that said basically Biden is slipping in private meetings, and they had 45 or so people they talked to over months. They do admit that most of these people are Republicans, not all they say, but most. And in fact, it's almost all anonymous quotes. Kevin McCarthy, the former speaker, is, I believe, the only one who went on record. McCarthy said to the Journal, I used to meet with him when he was vice president. I'd go to his house. He's not the same person. So if you didn't see the article, basically the highlights are the kind of things that, we've heard about Biden before and we sometimes see in public, closing his eyes, reading off note cards, just kind of not seeming like he was totally in command of everything at all times. That's what they're alleging happened in these private meetings. Now, of course, quickly, many Democrats in the Senate who were involved in some of these same meetings said they gave statements on the record to the Wall Street Journal contradicting these claims about these same meetings that the Wall Street Journal did not use in their story. So I think that is fair to point out. Also, I think it is worth noting that Kevin McCarthy, when he was still speaker, in 2023. So about a year ago this time, when he was negotiating the debt ceiling deal. Remember that with Biden and the Biden administration? And that was the big controversy of that time. Were we going to default on our debt? What would happen? McCarthy at that time praised Biden publicly for being, quote, very professional, very smart, very tough at the same time. So that's what McCarthy was saying a year ago. Now he's saying he's not the same person. So just take that for what it's worth. I think it's fair to point that out. And then the other thing, and this, we're recording this on Thursday morning, the 6th. Biden is in Normandy, France to commemorate the 80th anniversary of D Day. And he gave a speech, and I read a few excerpts, sounded fine, but there's a clip going around social media as we speak
Uh-oh.
where
Uh-oh.
after he speaks, he steps back and appears to squat. Well, he doesn't appear, he squats and almost kind of feels, it looks like he's feeling for a chair that isn't there, maybe. But what's trending on X is Biden pooping. That's like the top trending thing is pooping. Did Biden shit himself? That is the trend. Now, look, that's X. Take it for what it's worth. But that clip is going viral, and the point isn't, did he shit himself? I don't, probably not, would be my guess. It doesn't look like that to me, but who knows? But the point is, he's there in D-Day. He's there in Normandy with these World War II vets for the 80th anniversary of D-Day, talking about the threats we face and tying them back like to the threats we faced in World War II and talking about Putin and Zelensky is there and the modern day threats. But that is not, at least on social media, what people are talking about. What they're talking about as of now is, did Biden shit his pants? So that's kind of where we are in this campaign.
Okay. So just full disclosure. I have so I'm in St. Louis, Eric is in LA. We got the 2-hour time difference. It's 12:32 where I am, and I have been doing NASCAR stuff all morning for about 3 hours. So I had not looked at, I had not looked at Twitter. And the clip you're talking about, you know, first of all, there was another clip several weeks ago where Biden kinda stopped and he kinda bent his knees, and the same deal, people thought he shit his pants. And look, did he really shit his pants? Probably not. Did it look like he may have? Yes. Then somebody was telling me actually that that is a sign of of somebody who's aging, and I can't remember what particular malady it would have been, but I think we can all agree that look, Joe Biden has aged right in front of our eyes, and what Kevin McCarthy said, of course, Joe Biden is not the same guy as when he was VP. I mean, wouldn't everybody agree with that? Another clip going around is the clip of Joe Biden throwing out the first pitch at a baseball game when he was the VP. And when you see him do that, so I guess it was what, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, whenever it was. I mean, he does look like a totally different person. You could not see the Joe Biden of right now going out there and throwing a first pitch at a baseball game. And the one that I saw from 15 years ago, he does look totally different. So I'm just laughing because I had not heard about that clip or seen that clip, but it's bad. It's a bad look. Was he looking for a chair? Whatever it was, like there's too many of these. And here's getting back to the whole theme of this, which is the articles and all that. I always like to think about something like this. If I was a lawyer or if I was on a show, which side would I like to defend, right? Like, which side is it better to be on? And it's better to be on the side of, yes, Biden is doing all of these things, right? The Democrats and Biden in the White House, they're on defense, but it's so clear to everyone, Eric. Like, we're all seeing this. I'm not saying that doesn't mean he can't be president. I'm not saying that he can't be reelected, although I don't want him to run. But like we all see this with our own two eyes. We all see the missteps. We see when he walks off the podium, he doesn't know where to go. There are a lot of these moments. You can't pretend like it's not happening.
Absolutely. And when they happen again, even if they're innocent or even if they're very minor things, they feed into the pre-established narrative, which is rooted in truth, which is that he's really old. And that is a kind of a vibe thing, right? A lot of people don't vote on a deep study of, the analysis of every issue, right? They vote on vibes and how does it look and what do I think? And and the thing is, everyone would acknowledge that at 81, you are not the same as you were at 41 or 51 or 61, right? That's clear and obvious. It's also clear and obvious that physically, Biden has issues that they've admitted that he has a deterioration in, I'm not sure if it's his spine or his hip, but it causes his gait to be
Mhm.
off and it's caused him to slow down, which is why when he walks off the helicopter at the White House, it takes him forever to get into the White House. He has a degenerative condition, and that may be related to why he was doing that weird kind of like squatting thing after his speech today. I don't know. So that's true. But the important one is he mentally impaired? That is what really matters, right? FDR was in a wheelchair. I mean, we've had presidents who don't get around well. We know he's older and not the same. Those things are obvious. Is he mentally impaired when it comes to doing the job? I've seen some clips from him recently. I read some of the transcript, a little bit of it from the long article he did with Time Magazine. I did not read the whole thing. To me, his answers seem cogent. I saw him give that speech Friday where he laid out the peace plan between Hamas and Israel that he's pushing for. I saw some of the clips from his announcement the other day. We could talk about this if you want on the immigration executive order he signed. And he made sense. Even the clip the other day, I don't know if you saw it. He was walking away from the podium, and somebody said something about Donald Trump, and I think it was about the trial. And he turned and he looked at them and he kind of gave like a sly smile, and then he kept walking. It looked weird because it took him forever to walk out of the room and kind of turn around and turn back. But the smile was typical Biden. Like, that's what he does. He's like, he gives you that kind of like, I see what you're doing there. I'm not taking the bait, right? But because he moves so damn slowly, it looked like an old man. The smile, the reaction was what you would expect of someone who's totally understands what's going on. But the movement was weird. And you're in this situation where because of these issues and the age and the fact that he'll be 82 this year, there's no escaping this. And any little thing that happens, whether it's innocent or not, is going to become a big deal. And it's going to dog him the rest of the campaign. And he's going to have to try to overcome it. And look, he'll have a chance in 3 weeks. When he's on that debate stage, there's no hiding there. That's 90 minutes. It's him and Trump mano a mano. And everyone is going to be watching him and Trump as well, but especially him very closely to see how he handles himself. Is he up to the task?
I do think these memes and gifs though really matter. I mean, honestly, I think some people, I think a lot of people. I'll be the first one to say it. There are a lot of times that I see the headline, I don't read the article. I'll be the first one to admit. But then also, like, these memes are so easy to consume. I'm looking right now. By the way, the Babylon Bee, I think, is now clearly funnier than the Onion. Now, for conservative humor, I like the Babylon Bee. This New York Times pitch bot, I don't know if you follow them on Twitter. They're really funny from the liberal side now. But the Babylon Bee, because again, I hadn't heard about this Normandy deal. So the headline is Biden drops first bomb on Normandy in 80 years, clearly insinuating that he pooped his pants. And look, my thing is this. Biden is too old. Like, in a perfect world, you don't want Biden to be the candidate, right? But it is now, for what we think, still a binary choice between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. But, like, you know, has his mind deteriorated? Sure. Like, if you're 80 plus years old, we've all had, whether it's your grandparents or whatnot, maybe it's your parents, depending on your age. You've all kind of seen that, right?
Yeah.
The memory is not as sharp. So I don't think Joe Biden has lost it by any means. And I've said the whole time, I think Joe Biden is probably better behind closed doors. And you have seen a lot of bipartisan legislation being passed in his administration. But publicly, look, there is more pressure when all the microphones are in front of you and it's live television, and literally every word that he says and every movement, people are just waiting to create the meme, to create the gif. And look, he's probably going to have once a week something like this. It's going to be a stumble with the words. It's going to be something with him pretending to sit down with the podium. I mean, let's be real. We've seen this for about, is it close to 2 years now? I wanna say the last year, it's really gotten bad. Like, I don't remember when he fell off the bike, but I feel like if you start with whenever he fell off the bike, so maybe it's 18 months ago, but a lot of this stuff has really, we're seeing a lot of it with getting off the helicopter and the plane and the podium. I feel like it's about once a week. Like, again, this is, as of now, this is the Democrats' shot. But I mean, to pretend like it's not happening, and it's so easy to, like, it's so easy to make fun of. That's why it's so
Yes.
bad for Joe Biden. It's the easiest thing ever. You can put together a 5-second clip, a funny headline on Babylon Bee, and it gets shared. Like, I guarantee you, all my friends, if I look at my group text, they're all going to be talking about Joe Biden shitting himself. I
Right.
promise you that.
And the problem is not only is it bad for him, it overshadows what could have been a great moment for him. Like this speech about tying, the 80th anniversary of Normandy with the current issues we face with Russia and in China and expansion and a war in Europe. And instead we're talking about him maybe shitting his pants. I think, look, nobody should be president who is, I've said this before on this podcast, nobody in my mind should be president or in the Senate or in the House when you're over 80 years old. Because I think even if they're sound at that moment, the percentages are against you. And especially for the president, I just feel like you're taking a tremendous chance. So I just want to be clear on that. That said, Joe Biden is not running against a 50-year-old like Mensa member. Okay. He's running against Donald Trump. And here's what I will say. When I watch Joe Biden in speeches or interviews, there are some times where I'm like, oh, that's a really good point. He's making a nice argument. And there are other times I'm like, seems a little shaky. Doesn't seem like the same guy. That's what I think when I watch him. When I watch Donald Trump, I sometimes think, oh, yeah, that's a fair point. Okay. A lot of times, though, with Donald Trump, I think, what the hell is this man talking about? And it's not the same thing. It's not because I think he's deteriorated in terms of like going through dementia with Trump. I don't think that's true. Although I remember the one where he really, confused Pelosi and Haley, and that was weird. But with Trump, it's more like, what is he talking about? He's rambling incoherently, right? So that is who Biden is running against. He's not running against, prime Bill Clinton in terms of someone who's incredibly articulate, right? And so the point with Biden and what his people need to do is not to say Joe Biden is in his physical and mental prime. That's not the argument I would make. The argument I would make is, yeah, he's 81 years old. He's old. He's not quite, he just like anyone at that age, he's not going to be the same guy he was. But he's running against Donald Trump. Have you listened to a Donald Trump interview lately? And that is why the debate matters so much, because the debate is the two of them on stage and just a moderator and no audience. And here they are. And everyone will have a chance to see. And I feel like one of the things that Biden has going for him is because of all of these incidents and because of what Trump and Republicans have been saying for years, the expectations for Biden are so low, right? I mean, you listen to Trump or the Republicans, Joe Biden's like a walking vegetable. Like they think he doesn't know where he is. He's not doing, I mean, all these theories that aren't true, but that's what they, I think, sometimes honestly believe. And if Biden comes in there and he's like he was in the State of the Union or like he was when he and Trump debated in 2020, and he holds his own or maybe even wins the debate by, a fair estimation, it's going to be a potential game changer. And Biden needs a game changer. He is behind, and he has been behind since you and I have been doing this podcast. It's a small lead for Trump, but it's consistent. Biden needs something to shake it up. And that's going to be his chance in the debate. And if he doesn't do it, he's in a lot of trouble.
Okay, speaking of shaking things up, how about this is an interesting part of this whole campaign, obviously, is RFK Jr. and who he potentially helps or hurts. And we've been doing this podcast now, what, about I think 4 months or so, 4 or 5 months. And it seems like for most of it, when you're looking at polling, that RFK Jr. was hurting Biden by about 2 points, I'd say is fair over the course of the last 4 or 5 months as we've been discussing this. And so now I'm reading from this Hill article, but the headline is RFK Jr. swings edge to Biden in key battleground states from this poll here, which is Main Street Research, Polcom Lab, and Florida Atlantic. So now we're seeing a little bit of a switch here, and I'll just read a couple here. So basically, we're talking battleground states that Trump has a slight lead over Biden head to head in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. But when RFK Jr. is added to the mix, Biden takes the lead in the states, according to this poll. I think this is interesting. And I know that the Kennedys, it's obviously this great Democrat family for years and years and years. But when I think about the folks who like RFK Jr., and this is kind of a YouTube podcast thing, but I think of the red pill group. You know what I'm saying? You always hear that from the Matrix, like the people who, and I'm just bringing up Aaron Rodgers, but like Aaron Rodgers and a lot of people who have big time podcasts, a lot of these folks love RFK Jr. and they like what he stands for and some of the anti-vax stuff and really railing against COVID. So if this poll is accurate, it really doesn't surprise me that much because I feel like a lot of those people that I just described lean more conservative.
RFK Jr. is maybe the person who will decide this election, even though we know he is not going to win. And the reason for that is there are so many people who do not like both Trump and Biden. I mean, these are 2016 levels of people who didn't like at that time Trump and Hillary. It's in some polls it's almost 20% who really don't like either. And a lot of them, I think, at least temporarily, are parking their support in RFK. I saw a poll the other day that 50% of the RFK Jr. voters say that they are at least somewhat likely to change their mind. And that to me tracks. I think a lot of the RFK support, not all of it, there are true believers, of course, is people who just don't like Biden or Trump and are pissed off that this is their choice and are hoping that someone comes along on either the Republican or Democratic side to replace them. And I think they're just kind of parking their support with RFK Jr. And that's why I've said before, I think his support will fade as you get closer, particularly in the states that matter. And there's a couple key questions with RFK. First of all, is he on the ballot in the states that matter? We don't know that yet. I assume he will be because he's raised a lot of money. I think Michigan, they've already said that they've qualified. We'll find out over the next few months. So I'm assuming he will be. But that's the first thing, because if he's not on the ballot, then of course this conversation doesn't really matter. But his impact is so unique because of, you're right, where he's positioned on the political spectrum. A couple of years ago, it was clear he was, he was mostly a Democrat. He's always been a Democrat. His last name's Kennedy. He was an environmental lawyer. He was running in the Democratic primary. But what you saw over the last several years, even before he left the Democratic primary to become an independent and run as an independent, he was getting more love in the right-wing media. And a lot of it was because of COVID. He became a star, not because he was an environmental lawyer, but because of what he said about COVID. A lot of it disinformation, right? But his anti-vax campaign, that played very well in among conservative media. And that is where he kind of took off. And so because of that, it's hard to tell where his support is going to come from. If you look at national polling right now, according to Real Clear Politics, Trump is ahead head to head against Biden by 0.5, which is the range that it's been in for a long time. With RFK Jr. in the mix, and also Jill Stein, the Green Party nominee, and Cornel West, who's also running as an independent, five-way race, Trump's ahead by about 2 to 3 points. So that would lead you to believe that the larger field benefits Trump. And I think that is true. But I say I think because, as you pointed out, this polling was very interesting in the three states that matter the most, the blue wall states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. Biden was behind or even head to head in this poll you cited from Main Street, USA, and Florida Atlantic, but past Trump when Kennedy was involved. So that is an interesting thing that, and you see Trump kind of attacking Kennedy more and more. And I think that's going to continue as we get closer to the election, because it's really unclear exactly what impact he will have. But I will say this, in general, the more that these third party and independent candidates attract, I think on a net basis, it helps Trump. It's not a given, it's not a guarantee, but and the way that I look at it is, we've seen Trump run two national elections, 2016 and 2020. They were very different in a couple of ways. First of all, as I mentioned, in 2016, there was a huge number of people who didn't like Hillary and Trump. That wasn't the case in 2020. By 2020, a lot of the Trump people, Republicans, had come around to supporting him,
Mhm.
and the Democrats were very happy by and large with Biden. He won the nomination, and then he courted the left, the Bernie Sanders, the Elizabeth Warrens. So there was a very low percentage of people who didn't like both Biden and Trump in 2020. Fast forward to 2024, we've reverted back to 16. And of course, remember, Trump won in 16 and he didn't win in 20. And the other way that this election feels to me more like 16 than 20 is, I mentioned this before, in 2016, Trump and Hillary combined for about 94% of the vote. 6% went to independents, third parties, write-ins. In 2020, it was less than 2% went to third parties, independents, write-in. Biden and Trump got almost all the vote. If you look at the polling right now, and it's all over the place, Jill Stein and Cornel West are each getting 1% or so, and nationally 1 or 2%. And Kennedy's getting, I mean, in some polls it's 5%, in some polls it's 15. He's averaging 9 in the latest Real Clear Politics average. So 9 and then maybe 3 between West and Stein. That's 12%. If third party independents and write-in are getting 10 to 15%, I'm not saying Biden can't win in that environment, but I'm saying that environment favors Trump to me because Trump, high floor, low ceiling. That's what he is. And more the more people that peel away any extra votes make it to me this election more like 2016 where he won than 2020 where he lost.
Yeah, it's funny you talked about who could be the RFK Jr. voters. And like, I'll just tell you about my household. So my wife grew up conservative. I grew up a Democrat. I truly believe my wife would leave me right now for RFK Jr. That's she 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 watches and listens to every RFK Jr. podcast. I mean, just nonstop. I like RFK Jr. Now, does that mean I agree with everything he says about everything going back 40 years? Absolutely not. But I really like his message. His message seems to be much more unifying than Donald Trump and Joe Biden. I think the two-party system is destroying this country. So I think big picture, I would like to have more people like RFK have an actual shot. I don't really think RFK Jr. has a shot this year. But so that's what I'm saying. You have my wife who grew up Republican and I grew up Democrat. Neither of us are happy with the candidates from the two established parties. I've said I'm not going to vote for Donald Trump. I think he tried to overturn the election. I did vote for Joe Biden in 2020. I now feel like he is too old. I don't like what he's done on the border, but mostly I just can't feel good about casting a ballot for somebody knowing that he's already deteriorating and then he's going to be president till age 86. I just don't feel comfortable with that. So for me, I'm most likely right now to either not vote for anybody for president, but I am giving RFK Jr. a look. That doesn't mean I'm going to vote for him, but like I'm interested. Now, you and I a couple months ago or whenever, we had a little gentleman's bet. I don't even know if we bet anything, but we said, hey, at the time, RFK Jr. was polling around 10. And I said, if he gets in the debates, I bet you that pushes to 15. I bet you he gets close to Ross Perot numbers. So they're squeezing him out of the debates, though. And that's the thing. If he's not going to be in the debates, I think that number is going to go down, like you said. But truly, if he had a fair shot with 3 debates against Trump and Biden, I think that RFK Jr. would show really, really well on that debate stage. I think he'd look like the adult against the elderly patient and then the child who Trump is because he acts like a baby. But I don't think we're going to get that opportunity. So I do think RFK Jr., he's going to have less of an impact because of those reasons. I don't think he's going to get a fair shake.
You're right. I mean, the two-party system is a monopoly. I don't like the way our presidential elections are conducted for a variety of reasons. I mean, I think the electoral college is antiquated and dumb. I prefer ranked choice voting. I've said that before. I think it would transform our elections at the federal level. I think every state should go to ranked choice voting for the House and Senate and even for the presidency, although I recognize that constitutionally and logistically that would be a nightmare. But I agree with you. I want more choice. I think anything that makes this not a Trump Biden contrast is in general good for Trump. And I think RFK Jr., any kind of outside party, third party, independent, that helps, I think, on net Trump because, again, he has a ceiling. And Biden needs to make it a contrast. I think what will happen with RFK Jr., assuming he doesn't get in the debates, which, as you said, looks like the most likely outcome right now. I think there is still a sliver of a chance that he could qualify if he starts polling very, very well. I think he's got to get to 15% in several national polls, but unlikely to happen. I think he will fade in the states that matter. And that's look, this we don't have a federal election. This year we have a 6-state election. Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada, Georgia. And also, by the way, what might decide it, Omaha, Nebraska. Nebraska's second congressional district, which is one electoral vote, which very well may be the difference in this election, by the way. I mean, Omaha, Nebraska may decide this thing. That's where the election is. It's those 6 states in Omaha, Nebraska. And so it doesn't matter what RFK Jr. does in Pennsylvania, or I'm sorry, in California or Texas or Florida. It matters what he does in Omaha, Nebraska, and those other 6 states.
Yeah, and this gets back to we've had this conversation before, so I'll be short about it. But I do think it's easier for somebody like me in Missouri where my vote really doesn't matter to not vote for president or vote for RFK Jr. Whereas if you live in one of those 6 states, I think you're much more likely to really focus on Trump or Biden, the 2 guys that actually matter. Again, it doesn't matter if you're voting in freaking West Virginia or California. It really doesn't matter. Like, California's gonna go big blue, West Virginia's gonna go big red. So you can do the, "Oh, I don't wanna vote. I'm gonna go third party. I don't like either option." But again, if I lived in Michigan, which I've lived in 3 times, I would have a different outlook on the election because you can make the case in those 6 states that you really are deciding this election.
Absolutely. And I think this election I think is going to be decided not by the base, not by the turnout, because I think both sides will turn out. But I think it's going to be decided by that very large percentage of voters who don't like either candidate, who continue in these primaries that happen to vote uncommitted or vote for Nikki Haley on the Republican side or Marianne Williams on the Democrat side. The people like you and I to some extent are like this, uh, who don't really like these choices. But most likely they are the choices. And I think people are parking their support right now. Not everybody, like there are true believers like your wife and others, but I think a large chunk of RFK Jr. are people who are just kind of like, RFK Jr.
Yeah, and he's interesting, and
He
I
is.
just it's weird because for a guy who's a Kennedy, I still feel like most of the country knows less about him than Trump and Biden. It's just because Trump and Biden have both been presidents, and Biden's been around in politics for 50 years, and Trump's been around in business and apprentice for 40 years. And even though RFK Jr. is a Kennedy, like if you're not big into the YouTube and podcast world, you probably don't know that much about him. Again, he'll be on cable news every once in a while, but he's not your typical Kennedy. So for a guy who's I think close to 70 years old and he's a Kennedy, we still know a lot less about him than we do Trump and Biden. And I just think, yeah, so many people are just so tired of the two-party system. They're so tired of Trump and Biden that really anything different at least excites them or attracts them. And maybe they don't even vote for RFK Jr., but they like the idea of what RFK Jr. represents.
Yeah, absolutely. And we should have more diversity in our on our elections. It's a weird place to be. It's what makes it interesting on the one hand because we have all these other things we talk about, but it's a weird place to be that we're stuck with these two guys. But we are most likely. I mean, there's still a chance that we have our theory about this old switcheroo that I still think I still think it's in play on the Democrat side, 10, 15, 20%. If things don't
Mhm.
change, I think it would be the right move to make in July. And I don't know if I've said this before. I think to me, the obvious ticket is Gretchen Whitmer, Josh Shapiro. I mean, they are the governors of perhaps we talk about it's not a national election. You got to win states, and
Yes.
Democrats need to win Pennsylvania and Michigan. And if they win Pennsylvania and Michigan, the Democrats probably win this election. And they are the governors of Pennsylvania and Michigan, and they are very popular. And Gretchen Whitmer, if she were on top of that ticket, she would be the first female president, the second nominee of a major party without the baggage of the first Hillary. I'm just saying, I think it's there for Democrats to make that move. I think that would give them perhaps a better chance to win. I say perhaps because I still hold out that Biden has a good debate performance, exceeds expectations, and jumps ahead. Because remember, he's been consistently behind, but by a small margin. What did I say? It's a half point in the Real Clear Politics average. He doesn't need much. He needs a breakthrough, but not a huge one. And the other thing too is when you look at the likely voter screens, I've talked about this before. Trump, if you ask people how closely are you following things, right? Trump dominates the people who are not following things closely
Yeah.
and who don't vote in the past. Like he's up by 20 plus points. People who follow the news closely, who are really invested, Biden does pretty well there. And that's the thing. Are those people who don't follow news, especially mainstream media, who get their news from social media, who don't have much of a history of voting, are they actually going to show up? If they do, Trump's probably going to win. But if they don't, or they don't show up in big numbers, Biden does better in the likely voter screenings. And that, that matters when you get down to who is actually going, to show up. Again, I want to be clear. If I had to bet today, I would bet on Trump, but the odds I think are about right. 50, 60, 40, something like that. That's really close. That's essentially pretty close to a coin flip. Biden doesn't need much, but as the time goes by, you run out of time and opportunity to have that break you need.
Okay, so the big story last week, while I'm on vacation, it was what? It was Thursday. So
Yes.
Trump convicted in the trial, and just a funny little story. So that night we went out to dinner. We went kind of off the place we were staying, and we went to this. I don't even know if it was just a golf club or a country club, but we ate dinner there. So it was a golf course, and it was a golf course in Georgia. And I was laughing with my brothers-in-law, and I was just thinking like, and we're all drinking that night, and we're like, let's stand up and just somebody stand up. We're at a golf course in Georgia and be like, guys, we got Trump. Trump's going to jail. Just to see what the reaction was around the golf course in Georgia, or to do a man on the street. Just walk around with your phone. Hey, what's your take on Donald Trump being found guilty? So anyway, I was just having some fun with that. But here, I'll just give you my quick take. I did not follow this trial as closely as you did. My thing is this. Do I think Trump did these things? Absolutely 100%. The more I read about it, the fact that it's 34 felonies, the 34 is really about how they wrote the different checks and the bookkeeping. So 34 sounds like, oh, he did 34 wrong things. Well, no, he did one thing wrong in this trial, but they fudged the books essentially. I'm kind of paraphrasing 34 times. So to me, did Trump do it? I think absolutely. Does it feel felonious? To me, it does not. It feels more like a misdemeanor, which kind of goes into the narrative of everybody's going after him. You saw he raised all the money. So that's what I'm saying. Do I think he did it? Absolutely. Do I think it's that huge of a deal in relatives to some other things we've seen in politics? No, but also if you really realize why he did this, which was so that it didn't get out to influence the election. I've said this 5,000 times. You can't be always trumpeting the Hunter Biden laptop story and then
Right.
not act like this isn't the same thing. Because the same thing with Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal, those stories were caught and killed to not hurt Trump's chances for the election. So I think anybody who thinks they're not the same, you're being pretty hypocritical.
I think, look, a lot of things can be true at the same time, and I think are true here. And people latch on to one or two of them without talking about all of them. Like, just kind of running it down. Okay. Did the Stormy Daniels thing matter to the 2016 election if it had come out? Maybe. Remember, the Access Hollywood tape hurt Trump.
Mhm.
A lot of people thought he'd have to drop out. He won anyway, barely. But if this, it was tens of thousands of votes in a few states. If the Stormy Daniel things come out, maybe it changes it. I don't know. Probably not, but it's possible. I don't. Number
Maybe.
two, maybe. Number two, did Trump have a reason to kill that story? Obviously. Was he aware of this hush money scheme? I think so. I think he definitely was. If you look at how Trump and how he manages his money, was it a crime? Yeah, probably. Did the jury make the right verdict? I think so. But should it have been charged in the first place? I think that's a fair argument that it shouldn't have been.
Mhm.
Because if anything, it was most likely a federal election violation, federal campaign violation. The feds decided not to charge him. Now, that's partially because federal election law is weird and obscure. And so this was a novel legal theory. And if you're on the side of Alvin Bragg and the prosecution, you say, okay, yeah, maybe it was a novel theory. Maybe it hadn't been tested out before, but we did it and we won. And that's true. Of course, the Trump side will argue, well, we have grounds for appeal. We'll get it tossed out. The bottom line is it's the weakest of the 4 cases. If one it's the only one that probably will be decided before the election. So it worked out perfectly for Trump that this is the one that we're focusing our time and talking about because he and his people have legitimate arguments about whether or not this case should be brought. I think it's a very fair argument. It's also true that Trump has been skating the boundaries of the law in his business life, his personal life, his time as president. And when you do that, sometimes you will put yourself in a position where you could get into trouble. And so to just like act like Donald Trump is some saintly guy who just always colors within the lines and then all of a sudden this evil prosecutor found these things against him and cooked them up in a lab when this totally innocent man, it just to me is come on. Like again, I will buy the argument if you say, okay, he probably did it. Yes, it may have interfered with the election. Yes, it shouldn't have happened this way, but it's not worth charging a former president on a novel legal theory that hadn't really been tested before for what were essentially misdemeanors that you had to turn into felonies through a theory that you were using the bookkeeping misdeeds to conceal another crime. I buy that. I think that's a fair argument. But
Me
what's
too.
not a fair argument is Donald Trump is being persecuted. Like this had nothing to do. Remember, people say this is the Obama administration or Biden administration. This is Merrick Garland. This is not. They decided at the federal level not to prosecute this. It was then prosecuted as a state crime. So that argument's ridiculous. Also, think about this. If Joe Biden, because to me, the intricacies of this case are important and worth discussing. But the larger point about Trump and his allies are what they're doing right now, where they are essentially using this questionable decision to charge him as a way to say, well, the whole system is corrupt. And that to me is dangerous because just think about it this way. The president's son is on trial right now, and I think is very likely to be convicted, and then has another trial that will happen this summer. So the president's son is going to have 2 trials and potentially 2 guilty verdicts from the federal government that he runs, while his political enemy is going to have 1 verdict that isn't even federal, and the most serious cases probably aren't even going to happen before the election. Like if you were rigging it and this was lawfare, as Republicans say, then Biden and Garland have done a terrible job because not only can they not get the guy they want, his own son might be in prison before election day. Not to mention Bob Menendez, the Democratic senator from New Jersey, who's on trial right now for bribery. He could be going to prison. There's a Democratic congressman from Texas, Henry Cuellar, who just got indicted on federal crimes. So if Merrick Garland and Joe Biden and the Justice Department are practicing political lawfare, they are doing a terrible job of it because Democrats, including the president's son, are getting into more trouble from their own federal government than the chief rival for the presidency, Donald Trump. Also, side note, it's just such a shame. We'll find out in a few weeks what the Supreme Court decides. If it does end up, as it looks more and more likely now, that this is the only case that is decided before the election that Donald Trump faces. And we'll look back on that as an incredible stroke of luck for Donald Trump. I mean, the classified documents case was charged a year ago. It looks open and shut that he did this. That's much more serious than what's alleged here with the Stormy Daniels hush money payments. And Eileen Cannon, the federal judge, there was another story yesterday. She's just not making decisions on anything and just pushing it down the road. It appears she's either incompetent in over her head or she's trying to help Trump. The Georgia case, because of the affair, that case isn't going to be decided now before the election. And the federal election interference case, we'll see what the Supreme Court says about whether Trump has immunity. But man, what a stroke of luck for him if that's the way it works out. And it just completely undermines this argument that the justice system is somehow rigged against Donald Trump or out to get Donald Trump. No, what happened is he did a lot of crazy shit in his life. And when you do that, you put yourself potentially in legal jeopardy. I mean, that's just how it works.
Yeah, and you've read the polling over the last several months about how what would happen if Donald Trump is a convicted felon, okay, which is now the case. And I wonder because I've seen all the jokes and memes too. Like, I said that I would not vote for Donald Trump if he was a convicted felon, but not for this crime, right? Because I do think that when that question was posed in a polling sense, most people thought that had to do with whether it's January 6th, subverting the election, even the documents. I've said all along, the documents thing, it's too easy to both sides that. When Pence does it, when Biden does it, it's just it's an easy both sides. Even this with Stormy Daniels, you can kind of say, okay, Hunter Biden, guys have affairs. Clinton had an affair, blah, blah, blah. It's just kind of an easy both sides. The one that matters is subverting the election. And when that polling was put out there, I think that's what most people assume that if he was convicted of that, maybe I wouldn't vote for him. To me, that's always been the one that really matters. And we're not going to see it. I think that's a shame for several reasons. And I think a lot of people who in those polls said, I will not, I will not vote for Donald Trump if he's a convicted felon. I think a lot of them will change their mind because they don't think this is a big deal at all. And I understand that argument and for all the nuance that you very well laid out, they're going to go, "Yeah, but this isn't anything." So, I don't know.
I think, look, the numbers on those polls during the primary were really bad for Trump. Among Republicans and people who voted in Republican primaries, would you vote for him if he was a convicted felon? Very bad. I agree with you. I think most of those people would have come home no matter what. And most of them, when they were asked that question, weren't thinking about this case. They were thinking about the other more severe ones. But again, getting back to an earlier point, Biden doesn't need much. He doesn't need all of them or most of them. He just needs a
Mhm.
sliver. And there was a New York Times poll where they they had a poll a few months ago, 2,000 people. Trump was ahead by 3. They went back and asked they contacted those same 2,000 people. So same sample post verdict. Trump's margin went to +1. So that's a change. It's not a big change, but that's a change. And if that's consistent across the board, where the verdict and the trial was enough for just a few people in the margins to be like, I just can't with this guy. That could be the breakthrough Biden needs. Now, it's too early to know that for sure because we haven't gotten a lot of polling yet. But again, Biden's down by about a half point head to head. It was about a point and a half a few weeks ago prior to the trial. So maybe this is giving Biden a little bit of an edge. And I think you need to hammer the point. And again, it's not so much about he's a convicted felon. Like you can say that, that's fine. It's true. But to me, it's about the argument is not so much this case, it's feeding into the narrative of who Trump is. We talked a lot
Mhm.
about the narrative of Biden and the age and all the memes that come up and feed into that and
Mm.
reinforce that image. With Trump, it's about his conduct. And that is what you need to reinforce. Again, does it matter for the people who love him and who have made up their mind that, everybody's out to get him and the Justice Department is corrupt? No, those people aren't going to vote for Biden anyway. But as we talked about, there are a large number in the middle who don't like either. And for them, the argument to me is if you're Biden, this is yet another thing that shows you how selfish and petty and driven to care only about what matters to him. That is who Donald Trump is. He has shown us time and time again in his business dealings, going back, a long time, in his presidential campaign in 2016 with this salacious affair, the Access Hollywood tape, in what he did and how he acted after he lost the election and he just couldn't accept it, with his talk about going after his political enemies now if he takes over the Justice Department. That is who he is. He's a small, petty, selfish man. That, because I think, look, I happen to think that's true, but there's a lot that
Me
feeds
too.
into that. Yeah, and that is the argument, if you're Biden, that I think you need to hammer home. It's not so much about Stormy Daniels and a hush money payment and changing the books. It's yet another brick in the building of who this man is at his core. That to me is the argument you make if you're Biden in the closing stretch of this campaign is, okay, I may be older, but look who this guy is, right? And to me, because you don't have to convince many people, you just need to convince a few who don't like either of the two.
All right, let's end on this. Empty your notebook. What else you got? You got really 2 weeks worth. We haven't done a live show in 2 weeks. What else is on your mind?
Well, a couple things real quick. The Biden, I mentioned this earlier, the Biden immigration move. Too little, too late for a lot of people, obviously. And so look, we know this is political. 5 months before an election, come on. Like this is his worst issue in polling. He limited, if you didn't see it, he basically limited asylum seekers and shut it off if the number of crossers goes above a certain threshold, which we're already at, that we're going to stop accepting asylum applications. Essentially, it's the remain in Mexico policy that Donald Trump
Mhm.
had. Now, it's going to be challenged in court. We'll see if it's overturned. I've read some arguments that it's really going to be an interesting call on whether or not this is even legal. He didn't want to do this, obviously. And it's clearly political. Come on. But it's good policy. It's what we should be doing when we're in a crisis situation. It's what he should have done 2 years ago. If Biden had done this 2.5 years ago, I think he would have, assuming the courts had upheld it, I think he would have so much more credibility on this issue. But instead, he waited 3.5 years with 8 million people already crossing the border illegally to implement what is kind of a common sense thing in an emergency situation. Now, to be fair, Biden did try through legislation to fix this with a compromise that was worked out earlier this year in the Senate that would have passed and would have reformed our asylum system and would have helped dramatically. And Donald Trump said, no, don't do it because it's going to hurt me politically. And Republicans, of course, fell in line. So Biden can make that argument. But I mean, yeah, come on. This is clearly political. But look, sometimes good policy is political. You know what I'm saying? So it can be both. It can be political and it can also be good policy. What was the other thing I wanted to say? Oh, yeah, just real quick. I'm telling you, we'll talk more about this if it doesn't go well in the debate. My Gretchen Whitmer, Josh Shapiro dream team for the Democrats. I know it's a long shot,
I like that
but
though.
I'm telling you, if Biden doesn't do well in the debate and he's still behind, and that's not a given. I think he may do well in the debate, and I think, as I said, we don't know the lasting impact of this Trump conviction. If these polls show that moved things a point or two for Biden, that could be enough where he's in the lead post debate. And if he's in the lead post debate, even if it's slight, then this isn't going to matter. But if he's not, and he's not breaking through, and he still looks, he's still doing things like he did in Normandy today, where it looks kind of weird, and you're like, what's going on? I think the Democrats really have to think long and hard about a switch. And you know me, I've been a guy who said Biden deserves the chance, and I have said you shouldn't run anybody else. And I don't think you should run Gavin Newsom or Michelle Obama, somebody untested who maybe doesn't even want it. To me, if you're going to do it, it has to be people who are in positions now in the key states that could win you the election. And to me, that it's the obvious choice is Whitmer and Shapiro because they are both very popular in their states. And if you win Michigan and Pennsylvania, I saw a poll the other day. I mean, Whitmer versus Biden or versus Trump. Now, again, who knows, right? It's not a real campaign yet. She was up by like 8 points in Michigan. Biden is about even in Michigan, coin flip. If you win Michigan and Pennsylvania and the Democrats, you're probably winning this election, most likely. Again, unless it comes down to Nebraska's second congressional district, that's a thing that we got to watch too. I just saw this the other day because Nebraska is one of two states that gives electoral votes by congressional district. That district in Omaha, which is very highly college educated suburban area, Obama won it in 08, Romney won it in 12, Trump won it in 16, Biden won it by like 8 points in 2020. So it's a lean Biden district, but it's not a given. And, that one electoral vote could decide it if it's really close.
I like it. I like it. We just need kind of a poor performance June 27th from Joe Biden. All due respect, Joe, I'm not mad at you. And by the way, I brought up the Gavin Newsom thing, but that's really more because he's just the biggest name. I understand Gavin Newsom has a lot of baggage, and you're in
Yes.
California right now. The Newsom Shapiro ticket, from a strategy standpoint, is an
Whitmer
absolute
Shapiro.
What did I say? I'm sorry. Did I say Newsom?
Oh, you said Newsom. Yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry. The Whitmer Shapiro ticket is an absolute grand slam. I love it. So let's
It
keep
is.
let's keep talking about it because we need to speak this into existence. On that note,
And
Eric, good
one more thing,
stuff. Go
Charlie.
ahead. Yeah.
How about this too? The Republican convention is mid-July, right? So they're going to spend that whole convention trashing Biden, obviously, right? That's what
Mhm.
we do. And Kamala Harris probably too. Because one of the arguments they're going to make as we get closer is you're not voting for Joe Biden, you're voting for Kamala Harris because she's going to end up serving out the term because he's old,
Mhm.
right? We're going to hear that more and more. So they're going to be just thrashing those two people for 4 days continuously. What if the day after Biden and Harris say, you know what, we're not going to run again. We're going to have a whole new ticket picked at the convention. And now you don't really have a lot of time to attack the new ticket. I don't know. It makes a lot of sense. Again, if your goal is win and stop Trump, if that's all you care about.
Look, it makes a lot of sense for so many reasons, for strategy, and it would be so awesome for this podcast because we need things like this to happen. We need some shakeups. I'm still look, man, I'm getting more and more closer. That number's going up for me. I'm telling you, man. Like it is. It's just the thing you're supposed to do. Like it makes sense. Like they should do it. They should do it. So they better do it. All right. Everybody settle down. Thank you for watching. Comment, like, subscribe, and we will see you next week, Eric. See you, buddy.